Pennsylvania is in the political spotlight with a Senate race that could reshape Congress. Tonight, Democratic Lieutenant Governor John Fetterman is debating Republican candidate Dr. Mehmet Oz. This is not the only race that could reshape the Senate, of course, but this has been one of the closest watched for sure. It pits a controversial TV doctor against an elected figure recovering from a stroke, just one of 10 key Senate races we're watching this year. NBC's Elise Jordan caught up with some Pennsylvania voters who say they are undecided. They shared some of their concerns, including about Fetterman's health.
He's a big guy. He just had a stroke. I mean, I'm not sure how that's if it's going to impair his ability to perform.
I just haven't done the research yet on my own to figure out who I like better.
What about you?
I personally don't like either one of them. That's why. And I feel like Dr. Oz has some kind of nefarious reason for doing it. I'm not sure what it is. I don't know if it's a personal gain. I don't know, why he decided all of a sudden he wants to be a politician.
Joining us now is NBC News political analyst Claire McCaskill. She is a former Democratic senator from Missouri. Good to see you tonight, and I wonder what your reactions are to what we heard from those undecided voters. Sounds like they've got an array of reasons to trust one, not trust the other, lots of questions. What do you make of what they said?
Well, first of all, there's been tens upon tens upon tens of millions of dollars of negative advertising that have been flooding the airways of Pennsylvania. So it's no surprise, Joshua, that there are going to be voters who say, I don't like either one of them. That is a very common thing the last 2 weeks of an election where there's been a heavy media presence. But I got to tell you, I think this is a race all about authenticity. Is it difficult for John Fetterman with the results of his stroke to communicate as clearly? It probably is. On the other hand, Dr. Oz can't keep track of how many houses he owns, and he's got a reputation. I mean, I called him in front of a Senate hearing and called out all the fraudulent things he pushed on his show, trying to tell women if they ate green coffee beans, they could be magically thin. That kind of phoniness doesn't play well with the voters of Pennsylvania. So, but it's close. It's really close right now.
What do you make of that close race? I mean, a number of the polls show how close it is. There's a recent poll among likely voters conducted just in the last few days, or the last week or so, that puts them well within the statistical margin of error. John Fetterman leading 51-45 over Dr. Mehmet Oz, but depending on which poll you pick, they could be very much within the margin of error or even closer than that. If it's that close, what does that tell you about the candidates? One of the gentlemen who spoke to Elise Jordan said he didn't like any of them.
Right. I think what it tells you is that Pennsylvania is a very close state. It is one of the few states left in the country where there's one Democratic senator and one Republican senator. Bob Casey and Pat Toomey now represent the two different parties in the United States Senate. This is a state that went for Joe Biden, but also has been very friendly towards Trump in the 2016 election. So I think it's one of those states that has a certain number of voters. A lot of them are located in the suburbs that go back and forth between the two parties. And that's who they've been trying to persuade over the last few weeks. Now, the big challenge is trying to figure out who's going to show up and who's going to actually cast a vote.
I think Pennsylvania is fascinating for some of the same reasons that my home state of Florida is fascinating. Because depending on where you look in that state, it can feel like 20 different states. Florida just it defies gravity in some ways, that you have counties that are side by side and bear no resemblance to each other. Pennsylvania is very different in the Delaware Valley than it is in the Lehigh Valley, than it is where the Three Rivers meet. I mean, it's got all of these different kinds of energies and enclaves throughout this huge state. Is there really any way for us to handicap this race, considering that voters across the state, I presume, are looking for very different things from their next senator?
Well, I think at the end of the day, they want somebody who has integrity, who they feel gets them. And that's where I think that Fetterman has such an advantage. He was a non-traditional candidate, Joshua, in many ways. I mean, there aren't that many candidates for the U.S. Senate that campaign in a hoodie and basketball shorts. or scruffy jeans day in and day out. He went in as a small town mayor in a town that had been ravaged by what had happened to the steel industry and fought like hell to save that town. And the people in that town adored him because of his grit and his determination. I think that comes through with him, that he's going to, kind of speak truth to power. I think a lot of those Pennsylvania voters, especially those that are out away from Philadelphia and Pittsburgh, like that about him. And I think Dr. Oz, of course, has the challenges that he really hasn't lived in Pennsylvania. I mean, he bought a big mansion there just to run. And I think that is a problem for him. He doesn't feel of Pennsylvania quite like John Fetterman does.
Before I have to let you go, how much, if at all, do you think that the health issues that the lieutenant governor has dealt with will affect voters' perceptions? The debate tonight is being closed captioned for his benefit, at least partially closed captioned, to kind of help him with a little bit more accessibility to the pace of the debate. But how much do you think that will actually factor into the race?
I think this debate counts more than most debates. We have a saying in campaigns that the only people who care about the debates are the people debating and the 14 people who watch them and the people who write about them. But they really don't have a lasting impact. This one's a little different. I think Pennsylvanians are going to want to see that John Fetterman can handle himself. He may be hesitant at times. He may have to go more slowly than they were used to him talking earlier in the campaign. But if he can handle himself tonight, and if they can see his competence in terms of addressing the issues, then I think, he's got a really good chance, as long as the party base decides they're going to show up on November. Remember, this is a close race. No matter what, it's all going to depend on who's motivated to actually show up and vote.
Your point about who's going to connect the most with voters is well taken, and that's what we're going to get to in our next segment. But for now, NBC News political analyst Claire McCaskill, good to see you tonight. Thank you very much.
You bet, Joshua. Thank you.
So to Claire's point, let's talk about that, connecting with voters. Women in the suburbs are one key target for both Senate campaigns. Both candidates have honed in on them particularly, especially over their opinions on abortion. NBC's Dasha Burns has more from the suburbs of Philadelphia.
As election season tumbles toward the finish line in suburban Philadelphia, the kids at Upper Merion Dance and Gymnastics Center are flying and falling with abandon. But their moms worry about what happens when no one's there to catch them.
Inflation, it really affects how you parent, what you can do with your kids.
Philadelphia suburbs like Montgomery County are the new battleground. Once Republican strongholds, they helped put Biden in the White House in 2020. But now they're up for grabs again, with issues like the economy and crime top of mind.
Safety in not only education, but regular life. Huge concern with little kids.
Both Senate candidates targeting their messaging towards women here. Republican Dr. Oz stoking those fears about crime.
Deal with the crime and drugs that are creating lawlessness in the southeast of Pennsylvania.
And Democrat John Fetterman hanging his hopes on abortion access.
Woman, that is a choice that belongs to you and that should have always belonged to you.
How big of a factor is abortion in terms of what you do with your vote?
I'm certainly more pro-choice. I don't know if it's the top issue, but it is one of the more important issues for me.
What do you look for in a candidate?
For me, it's mostly the social issues, and having someone that's a true leader isn't pandering to their base.
Cindy is leaning Democratic, but hasn't made up her mind yet on the Senate race. She's waiting for tonight's debate to make a decision. Many we talked to were still undecided, like Montea.
I just want to make my best decision. Because I didn't make the best decision years ago. So
what do you mean by that?
I feel like I voted for the wrong person.
Who'd you vote for?
Trump.
Trump, one reason why Democrats need to win big in places like Montgomery County to balance out losses among rural voters and former Union Democrats in places like Luzerne County in northeastern Pennsylvania. Amy Janoski, a mom of two we met at Joan Harris Dance Studio, is part of that shift.
But you were registered as a Democrat.
I am a registered Democrat.
You're registered as a Democrat now, but you're more interested in sort of more conservative candidates at this point.
Yes, I am.
It's similar issues that have parents' heads spinning here, but Luzerne County could land on a different result. Take Ariane, mom to a ballerina who's worried about safety.
I honestly believe Fetterman would be more of the same. I don't think he's going to be a tough on crime politician, which is what we need right now.
For these women, the outcome of this election is personal.
And definitely the economy, gas prices, food prices. I'm single. I'm a teacher, but I have 5 other jobs.
5 other jobs?
Yeah.
What's your message to people in Washington right now on both sides of the aisle about what that experience is like? What do you want them to know about what life is like right now?
Don't forget about us.
That was NBC's Dasha Burns reporting. Now, abortion is just one hot topic driving votes this year. 5 states are also voting on slavery, or more to the point, on forced labor for convicts. Alabama, Louisiana, Oregon, Tennessee, and Vermont all have it on their ballots. The issue is a loophole in the 13th Amendment. It abolished slavery in 1865, but with a caveat, quote, except as a punishment for crime, whereof the party shall have been duly convicted, unquote. Let's dig into this with David Henderson, a civil rights lawyer and former prosecutor. Mr. Henderson, welcome back. Good to see you again.
Good to see you too, Joshua. Thanks for having me.
Can you paint a picture of what this actually looks like? Slavery is obviously abolished, the kind of chattel slavery that we think of. But what does this exception to the 13th Amendment look like in practice?
Well, Joshua, you just said it. Chattel slavery is abolished. But if a person is incarcerated, they can be put to work. And in at least 5 states, I think as many as 7, they don't receive any pay whatsoever. The ACLU did a report in June of this year, and out of 1.2 million people who are incarcerated in state and federal facilities, 800,000 of them work for an average of 13 to 52 cents per hour for those states that do actually pay them. Now, I have to point out that number completely ignores individuals who have not actually been incarcerated, but who are forced to work while they're behind bars. And I don't practice law in an ivory tower. I've worked on cases where folks have been wrongfully arrested and been forced to work as a condition of trying to get their cases waived before prosecution.
I think in addition to this, it's important to understand that correction systems kind of have their own economy, right? So just because you are paid, that certainly doesn't mean you can access the money whenever you want. And you're also inside of kind of the economy of buying certain things from the facility just to survive. So by the time whatever you have earned is accounted for, you could literally come away with nothing. It could all end up right back in the prison's pockets.
That's absolutely true. And again, that's for the facilities who choose to suggest that they're going to pay you anything whatsoever. We had a case here in Texas where someone was arrested by a police officer who was not licensed, and the prosecutor and the judge knew that. He had no right whatsoever to arrest our client. And they were saying, well, you know what? We'll drop the case if you agree to go to an inpatient drug treatment facility, though drugs had nothing to do with the offense he was allegedly supposed to have committed. But they did say, you know what? We'll start paying you in month 4 or 5, but the money we pay you, you will have to use to reimburse us for room and board. And that happens throughout the prison system. And prison labor accounts for upwards of $11 billion, which goes to your point. Incarcerating people and making them work without pay is big business.
So let me ask the counter argument. I mean, the 13th Amendment has abolished slavery, accepted this exception. There is no direct glide path necessarily to being a convict in prison. And if you don't want to do the time, don't do the crime. I can hear that being the obvious counter argument to changing the 13th Amendment. Why change it if this only affects people who've made a decision to be convicted of crime, and if this doesn't apply to every single convict in the country, but judicial systems, correction systems have some discretion in terms of who to put forced labor to?
I like the way you raise that argument because the same people who are making that argument typically argue for taking an originalist position in evaluating the Constitution and the amendments to begin with. And if we do that in this context, we've got to look back at how this happened with the 13th Amendment. You had southern states who said, look, our whole economy is based on forced labor. You can't just take the slaves away. And the answer basically was, we won't. You just have to incarcerate people first. And so you started seeing Black people being overwhelmingly incarcerated after the Civil War, and the laws of basic physics kick in here. An object set in motion tends to remain in motion. That's the same way that things operate today. We account for 5% of the world's population, but we have 25% of the world's incarcerated population. That's why beginning in 2018, Colorado led the charge in terms of saying, you know what, the United States Constitution may allow for it, but our state no longer will. 2 other states followed suit, and now we've got 5 who have this on the ballot in November. However, even though they're opting to vote to eliminate this language in their state constitutions, they aren't seeking to change the prison systems in their states.
Before I have to let you go, how confident are you that these 5 measures, anyway, that are on the ballot next month will pass?
You know, Joshua, I'm split on whether or not they pass, but here's the bigger point. Even if they do pass, if you're not going to change the way your prisons operate, what difference does it make? It's only lip service so you can say, you know what, we chose to bar it in our state, even though we're still not going to take a chip out of that $11 billion that's being earned by forced labor across the country.
So then what would, excuse me, what would the next logical step be if these items pass? Let's say they pass in all 5 states, just for the sake of conversation. What's the next logical step, do you think? Is there another next incremental step from here?
Absolutely. The next incremental step would be to say, you know what, we're not going to force people into slavery if they're incarcerated, and we're going to start making our labor laws, which we recognize are important for people who are free, also applicable to people who are behind bars. But I'll be shocked if you see that happen.
David Henderson, appreciate you talking these measures through with us tonight. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Still to come, Kanye. Adidas and Gap are cutting ties over Ye's anti-Semitic comments. What will this controversy cost him? And where does he go from here? We're glad you're with us for Now Tonight from NBC News. Today, Adidas proved him wrong. The company announced it is cutting ties with Kanye West, and his anti-Semitic remarks may have been the last straw. The company called his recent comments unacceptable, hateful, and dangerous. It says the breakup will hurt its net income by nearly $250 million this year. By one account, the Kanye-Adidas partnership generated about $2 billion a year. That is almost 10% of Adidas's annual revenue. Kanye West has always been controversial, but never like in the last few weeks. He wore a White Lives Matter shirt at his Paris fashion show, and he made a number of anti-Semitic remarks online and in interviews. One tweet claimed that he would go, quote, DEFCON 3 on Jewish people. That got him blocked on Twitter and Instagram. He lost his deals with Vogue, Balenciaga, and Gap, and Hollywood's largest talent agency, CAA, dropped him as a client. Also last weekend, a group of men hung a banner over the 405 freeway in Los Angeles. It read, Kanye is right about the Jews. The men gave Nazi salutes to the traffic below. Joining us now is Molly McPherson. She's an expert on crisis PR management in the age of social media. Ms. McPherson, welcome. Good to have you with us.
Hello, Joshua.
Can we start with just the news from today with Gap and Adidas? We know that their corporate relationships with Kanye West had been kind of on the rocks for a while. Gap had already kind of announced plans to unwind after Kanye said he wanted out of the deal. Adidas said earlier this month that it was reevaluating its relationship. But what do you make of the announcements we got today that they both said we're done?
Well, what we saw today is what happens when bigotry collides with brands. It affects a business. And when a brand is damaged, when a reputation is damaged, there is a cost to that reputation. If you were to look online and just follow along on social media, so many people let their values be known to the brands like Adidas and Gap that they would stop purchasing those brands. This generation now, the new generation coming up, when a decision runs afoul of their value system, the brands are going to pay.
How do you see this dust up with Kanye West, this latest one, in terms of the ecosystem of other people who espouse these views on a more regular basis, the so-called alt-right and white supremacists online and so on? How does this factor into that?
Well, something that Kanye West always relied on and something that Ye was depending on was the public's tolerance for his antics. But something that he did recently, it's as if he touched the third rail when he got into this discourse, this rhetoric, this anti-Black and anti-Semitic rhetoric. And then to have alt-right activists create this protest in Los Angeles over the weekend, people took notice to that. It's almost as if Kanye now has touched the third rail of a damaged reputation. The question is now, who is going to be the next artist that collaborates with Ye? Who's going to be the next brand that steps up and does that? We don't know who that's going to be. That's why I think this particular crisis, this PR crisis for Kanye, is a little bit different.
Here's what I wonder, though. I mean, we're used to Kanye West, excuse me, we're used to Kanye West saying controversial stuff, right? Back in 2005, during our benefit for Hurricane Katrina survivors, when he stood next to Mike Myers and said, George Bush doesn't care about black people. And then in 2009, when he rushed the stage of the Video Music Awards, took the mic from Taylor Swift when she had just won Best Female Video and said it should have gone to Beyonce for Single Ladies. So we're kind of used to Kanye being like 10 to 15 degrees off normal. But I wonder if the fact that he's already established that fan base immunizes him somewhat from the impact of what he has said. He ought to know better. But as my grandmother say, when you know better, you do better. And I think he knows that there's money to be made in being a provocateur. Maybe because we've already kind of accepted him as a star, he's a little insulated from some of the impact of what he says. But how do you see it?
I agree with you, and I agree with your grandmother. I like the term about the inoculation. He certainly was inoculated from being, for lack of a better word, canceled. And that's why he's threatening with the word, you can't cancel me now. But what I noticed following his trajectory is he seems to be following no longer a Kanye West playbook, but a playbook used by the alt-right. And that's where they deliberately and very intentionally try to evoke emotion. They attack people intentionally because they want that reaction. It's almost as if they're trolling. They troll people and their values, the media. So that playbook is running directly afoul with the public and with brands. I do think his loyal fans or stans will likely stand by him. But it's the business aspect to the Ye brand, which is probably the more valuable aspect to his brand, that's going to take a significant hit.
And how do you see these plans, which I presume are still in the works, for him to buy the social network Parler, which has become very popular with people on the right and the far right? How does this tie into that potentially?
Well, first of all, do we know that he's actually doing it? I don't know if that's actually confirmed. He's saying that, but it does seem to match the narrative that he's trying to capture this extreme right behavior. He had said that he wanted to purchase the app because he didn't want to be canceled anymore. And certainly affiliating himself with Candace Owens, whose husband is a part of Parler. It's this resurgence of Parler, and West assumed that he was going to probably ride that same resurgence. But I don't think what he was expecting was such an extreme blowback, not just from the public, but from his brand partners. And they now are in an adjacent crisis because of Kanye West. And I think that's what made the difference.
Before I have to let you go, not to upstage my grandmother, but another who rocked the mic and who, rocked lyrics, I would contend better than Kanye West, Maya Angelou, once said, when people show you who they really are, believe them the first time. I have a little bit of a problem with the idea that companies like Gap and Adidas and Media Rights Capital would act like we are shocked to hear that anti-Semitism is being thrown around. Really? You didn't know who Kanye West was? You didn't know the person you got into business with? And now you're shocked. Seriously. Part of me wonders how many conversations we don't know about happened within these companies before Kanye got bold, like, oh, I can say anything. And then he got his neck snapped. How much of this is a lesson for corporations about being more shrewd with the company they keep?
The public discourse that happens on social media is so valuable in terms of its research and understanding the tolerance of the public. If you were to spend as much as 10 minutes online, you would see that everybody was calling out brands, specifically Adidas, over the last 24 hours, questioning them in the length of time it took for them to espouse the values that they claim to have. It's this values piece that people are questioning it. Consumers nowadays have so many choices for their brands. It is so easy for them to turn and walk away from a brand. And many people online said they were going to do that.
I think that will be an interesting storyline going forward in terms of how that relationship between companies, consumers, and celebrities evolves before and during deals being made, because no one wants to be caught up in this again, I don't think. Molly McPherson, I appreciate you talking this through with us tonight. Thank you very much.
Thank you. You're welcome.
We will get to some of today's other top stories in just a moment, including new details about the St. Louis high school shooting, the sudden death of former Defense Secretary Ashton Carter, and the latest courtroom drama for Brittney Griner in Russia.
We're in constant contact with the Russian authorities to get Brittney and others out. And so far, we have not been meeting with much positive response, but we're not stopping.
Tonight's headlines begin in Russia. Today, a court there denied Brittney Griner's appeal for a reduced sentence. She faces 9 years in prison for drug charges. The U.S. State Department called it a sad day for justice, but it says the denial may open the door for a deal later on. NBC's Matt Bodner has more.
A Russian court today denied WNBA star Brittney Griner's appeal for a suspended or otherwise reduced sentence. She's currently serving 9 years on drug charges in Russia. Now, this decision by the Russian court today would seem to further limit her options for trying to find a way to avoid serving the entirety of that sentence in a Russian prison. She's currently in a detention center outside of Moscow, but following today's verdict, it appears that she will begin the process of being moved to a more permanent facility somewhere in Russia's penal colony system. There still may be a chance for Griner to appeal this at least one more time. There's talk from her defense team of appealing the case further up to a higher Russian court. But now that we've seen this process play out twice, there's really not a lot of hope that a Russian court will overturn this verdict at this point. You know, today they made their best case yet, arguing that Griner has been treated excessively harshly, pointing to several irregularities in the investigation and her detention, but most of all, pointing out that Russian citizens, ordinary Russian citizens who are brought up on these types of charges, typically will receive far less than a full 9-year sentence. One thing that did come out of today's hearing was that the two sides, the prosecution and the defense, agreed that Griner, due to time already served, will only serve out a further 8 years in her term. But essentially, what this all amounts to is that Griner's case is moving now, as it was before, to more of a diplomatic track. Her best shot at this point is an agreement between the United States and Russia. And on that count today, we heard from several U.S. officials, including President Biden himself, who said that these talks are ongoing. The U.S. government is trying to talk to the Russians about this, but that the signs are not very good.
That's NBC's Matt Bodner reporting. We are learning more about a school shooting in St. Louis. The attack killed a 15-year-old student, a teacher, and the alleged gunman. Police say the suspect graduated last year from Central Visual and Performing Arts High School. He carried an AR-15 style rifle and more than 600 bullets. Investigators say they also found a handwritten note in his car.
He wrote, quote, "I don't have any friends. I don't have any family. I've never had a girlfriend. I've never had a social life. I've been an isolated loner my entire life. This was the perfect storm for a mass shooter." End quote.
Police are crediting locked doors and a quick response from officers for preventing more deaths. Classes are canceled all this week. They'll resume virtually next week. And district officials say the school will remain closed for weeks of renovations. Former Defense Secretary Ashton Carter has died. He served in the last years of the Obama administration. A statement from Carter's family refers to a sudden cardiac event. Secretary Carter earned a doctorate in theoretical physics. He never served in the military, but he played a key role in shaping it. He gave the order to open all military jobs to women, including combat assignments. He also ended the ban on transgender troops serving in the ranks, with some exceptions. And the secretary established relationships in Silicon Valley to help update defense technologies. A statement from former President Obama reads in part, quote, Ash's greatest legacy, however, may be the generations of young leaders he taught, mentored, and inspired to protect our nation and wield power wisely, unquote. Ashton Carter is survived by his wife, Stephanie, and his children, Ava and Will. Funeral arrangements are pending. He lived to be 68. Up next, the nuclear threat in Ukraine. International inspectors are planning to visit sites there over Russian claims about dirty bombs. That's just ahead. Stay close. Russia is doubling down on its claim that Ukraine would use a so-called dirty bomb in its own territory. It had planned to raise the issue today behind closed doors with the UN Security Council. A dirty bomb contains radioactive material like uranium, but it's different from a nuclear bomb. That uses an actual nuclear reaction as its explosion. A dirty bomb just contaminates a large area, spreading radiation around. Ukrainian and Western officials have all rejected Russia's accusation. Top diplomats from the US, the UK, and France called the claim transparently false and a pretext for escalation. Meanwhile, Ukrainian forces are advancing in the Russian-occupied province of Kherson. Oleksiy Danilov, the head of Ukraine's National Security Council, has called the situation there not easy. Today, he spoke to our partners at Sky News about the war, the nuclear threat, and Britain's new prime minister. Here's Europe correspondent Adam Parsons.
Ви знаєте, росіяни можуть зробити все, що завгодно. Те репетування, які сьогодні відбуваються з боку Росії, кажуть про те, що вони до цього готувалися і були готові. І заяви, що нібито ми цим питанням можемо займатися, я можу дати дуже просту відповідь. Ну і ми би точно цими питаннями не займалися. Ми ж не Корея, не Іран і не Росія.
How worried are you that Russia's attacks on your power stations can bring this country to a halt?
Справа в тому, що останнім часом в світі взагалі не працюють жодні правила, які існували до початку лютого цього року. Це є дуже небезпечна річ. І коли вони атакують об'єкти критичної інфраструктури, це ж не військові об'єкти, це об'єкти, від яких залежить життя людей, робота лікарень, шкіл, людей похилого віку, життя. Це такий, знаєте, вже це гуманітарний тероризм.
The Kakhovsky Dam is the focus of so much attention. What is the situation with that dam?
Вона є замінована. Всі агрегати, які там є, які виробляли електричну енергію, на сьогоднішній день знаходяться під контролем російських терористів. Там дійсно, по даним нашої розвідки, є величезна кількість вибухівки. Чи будуть вони її використовувати чи ні, треба почекати і подивитися на їх дії.
What is your message to Britain's new Prime Minister?
Британія одна із країн, яка стоїть на першому місці по допомозі. Я більш ніж впевнений, що наступний прем'єр-міністр буде робити так само для нашої країни, як робив і Джонсон, і Трас. І це буде продовження тієї великої допомоги, яку робить народ Великої Британії.
That was Sky News Europe correspondent Adam Parsons. Now, to dispel Russia's dirty bomb claims, Ukraine is asking the International Atomic Energy Agency to inspect its nuclear plants. Inspectors are planning to visit in the coming days. The IAEA is the UN's nuclear watchdog. Right now, it's holding its nuclear energy ministerial meeting here in the U.S. for the first time. Russia was disinvited for invading Ukraine. Energy security is expected to be a major topic of discussion at this meeting, but how is that possible when a major nuclear power like Russia is at war? Joining us now is Seth Gray. He's the president and CEO of Lightbridge, a company that develops nuclear fuel technology. Mr. Gray is part of the U.S. delegation to the IAEA meeting, and he sits on a committee that advises the government on promoting nuclear trade. Mr. Gray, welcome. Good to have you with us.
It's a pleasure to be with you. Thank you.
Let me start with this IAEA meeting, because it's not squarely about nuclear weapons or non-proliferation. It's about nuclear energy in a broader sense, including just the energy that the world needs to run, which is what your business focuses on. How is this situation with Ukraine and Russia and all of this talk of nuclear weapons and dirty bombs and so on affecting that larger conversation about the role of nuclear energy in the world? Are you feeling it in your business, or is that kind of a separate issue?
Yeah, absolutely. In the business and here at the conference that's starting, Russia was disinvited from the conference. They weren't issued visas. So this is an international ministerial meeting that does not include Russia, which had been scheduled to be here. That's an immediate effect. Many countries would not have participated if Russia did participate. The topics at the conference focus very much on energy security, how to bring power to America's allies, to countries around the world without relying on petrodictators, without relying on Russia. In Lightbridge's business of developing advanced nuclear fuels for reactors, we're in conversations with many countries. We're working very closely with our own government here in Washington, D.C., to help make sure that our fuel is being developed, is being pushed forward as part of the U.S. government push to make sure that we can provide reliable energy and help our allies not rely on dictators, and also just to have more exports from the U.S.
Expand on that a little bit, because one of the themes, at least from both the committee you sit on with the federal government and IAEA, is energy independence, and the idea that if nations have other sources of energy besides fuel, they're less likely to have to deal with states like Russia to heat their homes. I know there's concern in terms of the future of nuclear energy, what we're going to do with the nuclear waste from plants that have already been in the pipeline. But where do you see that? I think your company's business is designed to create those options for the future, including nuclear plants that don't look like the plants we see today or are different sizes than the plants we see today, right?
Right, exactly. So there's a big push, and it's reflected in the agenda at the conference here, toward what are called small modular reactors, smaller reactors using more advanced technologies like the fuel that Lightbridge is developing. And specifically, what Lightbridge is working on is a fuel that will increase the safety of the reactors, because our fuel can run in the existing reactors or new ones, including these new small ones being designed about 1,000 degrees Celsius, about 1,800 degrees Fahrenheit cooler than the current fuel in reactors, and bring tremendous safety advantages, as well as non-proliferation advantages of really not being able to make a bomb out of the waste, as well as economic advantages of reducing the cost of power from the plants, partly by increasing the amount of power that the plants can produce. And also, our fuel can be used to help these small reactors being developed load follow, to go up and down in power, to pair with renewables as the sun shines and the wind blows on a zero carbon electric grid.
What do you make of these claims from Russia about using a nuclear weapon, dropping a dirty bomb, even the attack at the beginning of this war on the plant in Zaporizhia, which has the largest cluster of reactors in all of Europe? What do you make of some of these nuclear threats coming from Russia? Do you think that they're credible? Are they just bluster? How do you see it?
Well, we have to take them very seriously. They've attacked their neighboring country, Ukraine. They're acting very irresponsibly. With Russia losing in the battles, I think Russia is trying to expand to instill fear in the people in Ukraine and in Ukraine's allies. And this fear goes from shelling of power lines to nuclear power plants to knock off power to the plants, to direct shelling of nuclear power plants, playing on people's fear of radioactive events, to threats of using nuclear weapons, and now effectively threats of dirty bombs, with these strange claims, with Russia's defense minister calling the U.S. Secretary of Defense and European and other defense ministers and claiming that Ukraine is about to use a dirty bomb. And it seems all based on trying to bring about fear, but some of this is already very much directly hurting people. As power plants, including nuclear power plants in Ukraine, have been bombed offline or turned off for safety reasons as they're under shelling, as winter is setting in Ukraine, people are getting very cold. And they need that power not just for heat, but for food production. They need it for medicines. They need it for health care. So this is a very serious situation.
Yeah, we've definitely got these two side-by-side but interlocked conversations, one about nuclear weapons as such and all kinds of nuclear military tactics, and then the future of nuclear energy in a more civil, conventional way, including where that technology goes. Be interesting to see how this week's conference deals with the intersection of both of those things. But for now, Seth Gray, President and CEO of Lightbridge Corporation, I appreciate you coming on tonight. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So until we meet again, I'm Joshua Johnson. We'll see you tomorrow. Good night.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.